Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
I always wanted to say that from up here. I'm Robin Kaplan. Along with Rochelle Ludwig, I am the co-chair of UJA at PAS. I have never been prouder to have this role. I have never been prouder of our rabbis and this community for their ongoing generosity and support of UJA. For those of you who have heard me speak before on behalf of UJA, I have always been proud they are ready to react to a crisis, big or small, immediately because the infrastructure is in place. This was true on 9/11 because they were there on 9/10. This was true with Superstorm Sandy, but never was this more true than on October 7th. UJA was able to react to this crisis because everything was in place on October 6th. I recently went to Israel with UJA, and I still don't have all of the words to express my feelings of having been there, except to say I was so happy I went. The entire country is in mourning. It's like a giant Shiva call, and I was glad I was able to be there and show up. I've had friends say to me, I don't need to go. I don't need to bear witness. I believe it. And while they do, like a Shiva, it's not about them. It's not about you. It's about them, the people who were in mourning. Every Israeli we met thanked us for coming. One of the highlights and horrors of our trip was reuniting with Leora Ilan from Kibbutz Kfar Aza. Thanks to UJA, in December, I had the privilege of hosting Leora and her two granddaughters, who were 15 years old, Gali and Mika, in my home in New York City. They traveled to tell us their story. On October 7th, they were attacked, and they survived by being in her safe room for 34 hours. They went into the safe room at 6 a.m. thinking they'd be out shortly for their cup of coffee. But they winded up being in there for many more hours, and they realized what was happening. They realized the IDF came multiple times to try to save them and couldn't get them out at that point, as there were Hamas terrorists hiding in their home. Finally, after 34 hours, the IDF rescued them. However, Leora's son, Gali's dad, Tal, who was the commander of the civil guard of the kibbutz, was not as fortunate. He was murdered that day by Hamas, but not before he was able to warn the neighboring kibbutz. Then, when I was in Israel, this all came to life for me. Leora took us back to her destroyed home. We saw the safe room where they hid amidst her literally crumbled house, in the most beautiful setting where she had lived for 35 years. Her strength is remarkable. Leora and her family were able to share and relive this horrific day and the days since with dignity. But this is just one of so many heart-wrenching stories we heard. The Israelis are incredibly resilient, Sienna, and tell their stories as a way of healing, and so we can all bear witness to these horrible atrocities. I have something for you, Sienna and Caroline. We also, in Israel, went to the hotel where Leora and the other Kfar Aza survivors are currently living. At the entrance to the hotel, the first thing you see is a board listing the names of the 19 hostages that were taken from Kfar Aza on October 7th, noting the ones that thankfully have been returned and the 5 that are still in captivity. Leora gave me this Bring Them Home necklace. It says, "Our hearts are in Gaza," and asked us to wear them so that when people ask us what this is, we can explain about the hostages still being held for 120 days. Caroline and Sienna, I hope that you will wear these and tell the story as well. Throughout this whole crisis and the past 9 years, UJA has had the privilege to have Eric Goldstein as its CEO. Thank you, Eric, for your outstanding leadership. Every year, not just this year, at UJA Shabbat, we bring speakers to educate our community on the work of UJA and its partners. And this year, I am proud to introduce Eric to tell you more.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thanks so much to Rochelle and to Robin for your co-chairing of Park Avenue, UJA at Park Avenue Synagogue, and Robin for that very, very moving account of your recent UJA trip to Israel. It's really great to be back here. It's a beautiful shul. What a wonderful service. And there's, as Rabbi Cosgrove noted, an extraordinary connection between this synagogue and UJA. It would take much too much time to mention all of the leaders, but like Rabbi Cosgrove, I need to mention just one. Amy Bressman, who was our immediate past president, serving 4 years of what was supposed to be a 3-year term during an incredibly difficult, challenging moment for our community. I won't embarrass Amy, but suffice to say, she represents the very, very best of communal leadership. More broadly, I'm incredibly grateful for the entire Park Avenue Synagogue leadership. Special, extraordinary thanks to Rabbi Cosgrove, a longtime UJA board member who's always been a stalwart advocate for UJA, but who's brought it to a whole new gear since October 7. Rabbi Cosgrove's speech from this bima on Friday evening, October 13, less than a week after the atrocities of October 7, will long be remembered as a historic model of inspired leadership, motivating so many at Park Avenue Synagogue and well beyond to give tens and tens of millions of dollars to support the people of Israel. So legendary, in fact, was that moment that Rabbi Cosgrove now teaches a master class in fundraising at UJA Federation to all our professionals. But the truth is, all seriousness, Rabbi Cosgrove is not only a gift to Park Avenue Synagogue, he's a gift to our entire Jewish community. Mazal Tov to you, Caroline and Sienna are your bat mitzvah. My thanks to you and your families for allowing me to share this bima with you this very special Shabbat. The first time I had the honor of speaking in this shul was almost exactly 9 years ago in February 2015, not too long after I started at UJA. And it's almost hard to fathom how different our world is today. To give you a sense, I spoke here in that February 2015 speech about a recent UJA solidarity mission to France. It was in response to a recent anti-Semitic incident on a synagogue in Sarcelles, a Paris suburb. By the way, Amy Bressman, Rabbi Cosgrove, and his father, and Andy Lustig were also on that trip. And I vividly recall walking away from that trip with two principal takeaways. First, it was incredibly important for us, the New York Jewish community, to support the Jews of France, to give them security funding, to give them funding for communal resilience. But the second primary takeaway was, thank God, it's different in America. I had this sense that we in America were largely insulated from that which was taking place in France. And it's hard to conceive how our world has changed since that moment. I also spoke during that same Park Avenue Synagogue speech in February 2015 about Operation Tzuk Eitan, which is Israel's Operation Protective Edge, that began in the summer of 2014, literally days after I began at UJA, in what was a 50-day war between Hamas and Israel, resulting from Hamas's kidnapping of 3 boys who were ultimately killed. To that point, that had by far been the most serious war between Israel and Hamas, during which 73 Israelis were tragically killed, 67 soldiers, and 6 civilians. And now, as everyone has been speaking about, October 7. I was in Israel that day. It was a Shabbat, and as we know, Simchat Torah in Israel. And while it took a few days after October 7 to understand the full enormity of the horror of that day, we knew immediately that the crisis in Israel was on a scale not seen since the Yom Kippur War almost exactly 50 years ago, which is why on October 7, for the first time in UJA's history, we convened our executive committee on a Shabbat and immediately authorized $10 million from our endowment for emergency needs in Israel. In fact, ours were the first significant overseas dollars to reach Israel and provide for immediate needs of victims. Just hours later, we opened UJA's emergency fund to galvanize public support for Israel. I've now traveled back to Israel a number of times since October 7, and I'm scheduled to go back there tonight. And there's clearly a line of demarcation: life before October 7, life after. It's hard to believe now, but in March 2023, less than a year ago, a report was released of the world's happiest countries. And Israel was ranked number 4 on the list. It was the only non-Nordic country in the top 5. By comparison, the United States was ranked 15th. To be fair, these survey results predated the political turmoil surrounding judicial reform, but fundamentally, notwithstanding that Israel is surrounded on all sides by enemies, Israelis were happy. They felt secure. They believed in the almost invincibility of the Israeli army, its overwhelming intelligence capability, its extraordinary military preparedness. Israel was a place where Jews did not hide. And all of that was shredded in an instant on October 7. And today, you have the continuing heartbreak of the hostages 120 days later, still being held in captivity. The daily horrific listing of Israeli soldiers killed and seriously wounded. The hundreds of thousands of reservists who were called up on October 7, many of them still in the army, their lives upended away from their families and jobs. The tens of thousands of parents, spouses, children of those soldiers who don't sleep at night. The over 200,000 internally displaced Israelis from the south and north, uncertain when or even if they'll return to their homes. And the heartbreak of the loss of innocent civilian lives in Gaza. The trauma in Israel is pervasive. On a massive scale, with no precedent in Israel's history, in a country so small, nobody is untouched, and it's going to take years and years to heal and find a pathway forward. But against the vast sea of need and heartache, there's also incredible resilience, inspiration, and hope. The enormous heroism and patriotism of Israel's soldiers, who many are now referring to as Israel's greatest generation. The thousands of Israelis who have opened their homes to welcome in complete strangers. The tens of thousands of volunteers from across Israel who still today continue to spend much of their time helping others. And the Jewish community here in America is more united with Israel than it's been in a very long time. The outpouring of financial support has been extraordinary. To date, beyond the initial $10 million from UJA's endowment, this New York community has raised over $170 million to support the people of Israel. And to date, we've given more than $71 million in emergency funding for a wide range of immediate and longer-term needs, from the sacred task of recovering the dead in accordance with Jewish law, to supplying life-saving medical equipment in hospitals, to providing educational and recreational program for tens of thousands of children and teens now living in small, cramped hotel rooms with their parents, to supporting widespread trauma needs, including the particularized care for the survivors of the Nova Music Festival, to supporting victims of gender violence, to providing tens of millions of dollars for the communities most devastated on October 7, places like Kibbutz Be'eri, Nachal Oz, or Kfar Aza. The needs are absolutely enormous going forward, and there's lots of uncertainty, particularly with respect to what's going to happen in the north with Hezbollah. But thanks to this congregation and the tremendous generosity of the broader New York community, we will be there. We will be there now, we'll be there for the intermediate, and we'll be there for the long term and the day after. Turning back to America, for us, October 7 provided a different kind of wake-up call. We know anti-Semitism was rising in America long before October 7. But since then, anti-Semitic incidents in this country have increased by 360%. Many Jewish college students have felt the need to hide their identity, to avoid harassment. So have Jewish students and teachers in K-12 public schools. And we've been deeply dismayed, if not at all shocked, at the silence and half-hearted statements of support from purported allies. UJA has, over a number of years now, significantly increased our work combating anti-Semitism. For example, creating the Community Security Initiative, CSI, in 2019 to protect the Jewish community of New York. And as the largest by far Jewish philanthropic organization in New York, with an extraordinary network of partners in the Jewish and non-Jewish world, we've long been focused on supporting Jews on college campuses, in K-12 schools, in the workplace, and bridge building through government and community relations. But the events of October 7, the reverberations here in America, require all of us to do more. Since October 7, we've provided over $4.5 million in additional emergency support to the Community Security Initiative, now a first 15-person security team led by Park Avenue Synagogue's own Mitch Selber. Happy birthday, Mitch. We're educating electeds and influencers of all types about the contemporary face of anti-Semitism, including funding numerous trips to Israel for public officials, interfaith clergy, non-Jewish NGO leaders, heads of unions, and many more. In fact, right now, there's a UJA-funded trip in Israel for UN ambassadors, led by Israeli Ambassador Gilad Erdan, with representatives from 9 countries, including 3 currently sitting on the Security Council. On college campuses, we're working with university administrators to develop better policies and codes of conduct to protect Jewish students. We're funding Brandeis Center lawyers to investigate claims of anti-Semitism on campus. We're increasing the capacity of local Hillels to build safe and vibrant Jewish communities for our students. We're actively working with both the city and state departments of education to enact better policies addressing anti-Semitism in public schools. More broadly, we're helping to mobilize the local Jewish community, supporting new grassroots communities that have emerged, parents of children in private schools, leaders of Jewish employee resource groups at New York companies, and helping local community members to become more engaged with their local elected officials. And the critical topic of social media, we're working with both national and local partners to influence how Jews in Israel are portrayed. But as important as it is to combat anti-Semitism, we cannot ever allow fighting anti-Semitism to define us. We cannot ever make fighting anti-Semitism the raison d'etre for being Jewish. To do so would be as Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt said, to cede control of our identity to our oppressors. Of course, we need to do all we can to combat anti-Semitism, but I believe in this moment we need to focus even more, doubling down on Jewish education, providing our community with more and more high-quality content and connection so that Judaism is valued as a treasure to be cherished and passed down. And there's a particular opportunity to do so now. On October 7, we know the events of October 7 have led many to re-examine their priorities and their communities. Jewish pride in many respects has been unleashed. There's a hunger among so many more people now to explore Judaism, to learn about Jewish life, to engage in Jewish life. I have a friend who since October 7, for the first time in his life, wears a yarmulke in public, except when he's eating a cheeseburger. And we know that people have started showing up in synagogues in record numbers, lighting Shabbat candles in record numbers, hosting Shabbat dinners in record numbers. We don't know if this trend is fleeting or sustaining, but we need to do all we can in this moment to turn this period of intense pain and transform it into purpose and possibility. Our Parsha Yitro makes this point so powerfully. The culmination of the Israelites' evolution was not at Kriyat Yamsuf when they left Egypt. That was read in last week's Parsha, and it was saving Israel from that generation's anti-Semitic oppressors in Egypt. But the culmination of Israel as a nation is in this week's Parsha, in Parsha Yitro, with the receipt of the Torah. It's not about freedom from oppression, freedom without limits. It's about what we do with that freedom. It's how we live as a proud and public Jewish people, how we transmit our cherished values. So that when the war ends, and please God, when the hostages are all home, we will continue to fill our synagogues, light our Shabbat candles, and create even more vibrant Jewish life and experiences. That's our challenge, and that's our opportunity. And as opposed to so much else in our lives, it's entirely in our own hands to achieve. Thanks so much, and Shabbat Shalom.